So, brief overview. We've already checked introductions off the list. We'll talk very briefly about what is low vision or visual impairment. You're probably going to hear us use those terms somewhat interchangeably today. In the slides, if you are looking at those, you will notice that I've abbreviated those as LV for low vision and VI for visual impairment, just to get some more content on the slides. So just kind of be aware of that. We'll talk about what it is. We'll talk about some very common causes of visual impairment. We'll talk about types of assistive technologies, tools, and strategies that are utilized by folks with low vision. And then we will also just cover 3 or 4 kind of caveats or things to keep front of mind during Julia's and my conversation today. Then we'll jump into the conversation and we'll wrap up with Gianna telling us a little bit about some of the products and services available from Accessible Web. And finally, we will do that audience Q&A, and that will wrap up the session. So let's move on to our second slide. What is low vision or visual impairment? So in the most broad terms, visual impairment is defined as a loss of visual acuity or field, or a brain processing disorder that limits vision to the point where it cannot be fully corrected with contact lenses or glasses. So this doesn't mean that if you have significantly degraded vision when you don't wear your glasses or contacts, but that it is corrected when you do put them on, you don't qualify. So this means that even if we do use some correction with contacts or lenses, we're still not corrected to what would be considered typical vision, 20/20 acuity, and 170 degrees for horizontal visual field and 135 degrees for vertical visual field. It's important to understand, with all that said, that low vision exists on a spectrum, and the experience of individuals with low vision will vary widely from one person to the next. Slide number 3, let's talk about some common causes of visual impairment. The first of which can be genetic conditions, something that you're born with. Can be injuries to the eyes or any of the visual processing center in the brain. Diseases, one that folks think about a lot, maybe you heard about, diabetes can cause vision loss. And then also brain-based disorders, such as a cortical visual impairment, or even a stroke. So where the structures in the eyeball and the optic nerve are healthy, but the parts of the brain that interpret visual information have been affected. On to slide 4 now, we'll talk about some assistive technologies that are commonly used by folks with low vision. The first of those we're going to get to hear more about today, that is screen magnification. There's a few different varieties of screen magnification. It can be built into your operating system, so like Windows or Mac OS. It could be browser-based. You might have noticed within Chrome, there's some options to adjust the zoom. Or it can be a third-party software application, and one you may have heard of is ZoomText. That is probably the third-party application is probably the most robust, with the greatest number of features and customizations contained within it. But those are sort of the main categories of screen magnification. You may also find folks with low vision will use either like a high contrast or a large print keyboard or input device to make it easier to see what they're typing. Also, color and contrast enhancements or adjustments, things like reducing transparency, increasing contrast, or including additional visual indicators like on your mouse pointer or your text cursor to make them easier to track and locate on the screen. And then lastly, screen readers or text-to-speech. So if you were here last week, we talked a lot about screen readers. And there are sort of lighter versions that provide some text-to-speech as well. So the important thing to say about that, and this is actually going to kind of lead us right into slide 5 here, which are things to keep in mind, and that is to say that very often folks with low vision will leverage more than one type of assistive technology to get the job done. So that's can be because sometimes vision changes from day to day, depending on your visual condition, or can change even throughout the day. So maybe you're using your eyes to read and navigate in the morning, but later in the day, the end of your workday, your eyes are tired, or whatever the case may be, you're switching over to text to speech or a screen reader. So it's just really important to recognize that often folks use more than one type of assistive technology, and it is definitely not a one size fits all approach for users with low vision. Um, so the the last thing to just sort of keep in mind, and sort of front of mind as we go through this conversation, is to say that continuously engage with your stakeholders with disabilities, your in particular, your low vision users. They are going to be the experts in their own access needs. And so engaging with them, asking questions, gathering feedback, and putting that feedback into practice will get you sort of the most accurate information in terms of how digital spaces work for them, and when barriers arise, how strategies that work for them to sort of remediate those barriers. So that covers the initial part here. That's the end of my slides, and that's sort of the context and setup. And now I want to jump right over, Julia, and get talking to you, and get some insight into your lived experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the first question on our list here is, when you think about like your day-to-day routine or activities, whether that's, work, school, personal life, whatever the case may be, can you think of a situation where accessibility was really good? Like things were in place, you had a great experience, it was really easy to use, and perhaps it made it easier or more efficient for you to complete a task. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one example that always jumps to my mind is I use a screen magnification tool pretty much on any device that I work on, whether it's, when I'm at work and it's an HP laptop, whether it's I am on the bus transitioning to my work and I'm reading some emails on my phone. I'll use the built-in magnification on my phone. I have a tablet, so I use built-in magnification on that. Honestly, the magnification function on most operating systems they're really good these days. They didn't used to be. When I was
Mhm.
in school, I would use a service like ZoomText for that kind of magnification tool. But now that it's built into most operating systems, it's really convenient, it's really easy and accessible. The funky thing is always going to a new device that maybe I've never
Mm,
used before. So sometimes at work, I have to use a different laptop or whatnot.
mm.
So I know exactly where I need to go or how to search for tools on most platforms, not all. And that makes my life so much easier.
Yeah, 100%. So what I took away from that is like having that functionality built in. It's not anything special, it's not anything extra. You're not purchasing additional software. It's predictable, it's easy to use, and having that at your fingertips, regardless of what device you're on, has really been a game changer.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
100%.
yeah. Um, so with that said, kind of thinking about the same circumstances, work, school, home, can you think of an example where accessibility features or functionality maybe wasn't in place in a way that worked for you? And can you maybe give us an example and talk a little bit about, kind of the effect that had on your ability to either get things done, be productive, stay connected, whatever the case may be?
Yeah, so one thing that I've always found is I prefer to access most websites, I'll say in my personal life, from my phone or my tablet. In which case, a lot of websites, of course, have a mobile version of their site versus,
Mhm.
a laptop or computer or desktop, whatever version of the website. And I find that a lot of mobile websites are not very accessible. Oftentimes they tend to be super buggy. They may not always work well with those built-in magnification systems. And that leads to a lot of like confusion. I'm thinking specifically, and I can't remember the website that I was literally just visiting this morning, but they had a navigation bar, of course, on the right side, and it just wasn't working quite right with my magnification on my phone.
Mhm.
So that can be challenging because it just doesn't allow me to navigate through the website and get the information I need or fill out
Sure.
what I need to. So that can be challenging.
Yeah, I can understand that 100%. And so, to that point, when we are doing accessibility work on our websites and web content, we want to make sure that we are engaging with users and just with disabilities to test it out on, maybe it's intended primarily to be used from a desktop or a laptop, but also checking those mobile environments to make sure that things are still displaying properly and providing for a smooth user experience. I'm curious, related to that, with things like not working specifically with the built-in Zoom, how do you
Mhm.
find third-party apps to be? And let's say maybe like not the native like Apple apps, but other third-party apps. What's your experience been like there?
You know, it's been mixed for sure. I think
Mhm.
there are certain apps out there that do a really good job of being accessible and working with those, screen magnifying functions, but there's definitely a couple of apps, and I'm going to use an example of if anyone knows what Magic the Gathering is, I play Magic the Gathering. It's a card game similar to like a Pokemon style
Mhm.
card game where you battle different people and you put decks together and whatnot. And there's an app so you can play this game online, and that's one of my favorite things to do. And the app does not work super well with the magnifier function. So I usually use my tablet for that particular app. And I have an iPad. And to zoom in, you take 3 fingers and you double tap on the screen. And then when you need to move around the screen, use those 3 fingers to kind of swipe around to move your perspective around. And this app, the Magic the Gathering app, anytime I use my 3 fingers to either zoom in or move around on the screen, it just always clicks on something. And that's so
Oh,
frustrating because I'm like, I didn't mean to click on this thing. I was just trying to make the screen more adaptable to me and
sure.
trying to see what I need to see and build what I need to build. And it's so frustrating. I wish that more app developers would, you know, be able and willing to go in and make sure those types of accessibility features work well with their app.
Absolutely. And, that's a really good point that you're talking about, that you're playing this game and you're using this app. And so, um, just in general, I think for people to know, like app developers and businesses and whatever the case may be, you have an audience out there, people with disabilities trying to interact with your products. We are there, we're wanting to use your products. And so taking the step of incorporating accessibility work into your processes is going to benefit those users. And believe me, it's still uncommon enough. So when we have a really good accessibility experience, we are spreading the word. I mean, that's certainly for me. I don't know about you, Julia, but if something works really well, boy, I'm telling people because
Absolutely.
it's still uncommon enough of an experience.
You're like, oh my gosh, this one particular app or this one website had this really cool accessibility feature. Please
Yes,
use it. Spread the
exactly.
word.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And I think, my next question would be to sort of say, like, if and when you do encounter a new app or a new website or a new tool that you have to use, um, I think we touched on this a little bit already, but is there anything that you like to see, like right from the jump for an accessibility feature that might be incorporated that you kind of know, like, okay, this is gonna, I'm likely to have a good experience here. Is there anything in particular you look for, say, like if you're vetting a new app? Um,
Absolutely. I
yeah.
honestly, I look for options. I look for,
Mhm.
somewhere within their settings or options or whatever it is that there is these accessible options. So for instance, the Green Mountain Transit website, which is the bus system in Chittenden County that I use to get from home to work to appointments and back and forth and everything. Their website, and even their mobile website has, an option in the top right corner to enlarge their text, which I think is so cool because you can make it your own experience and you can tailor it to what is going to be easiest and best for yourself. And honestly, I always think that's the best way to go is give us these options. You can lay out your app in a way that's going to look nice and everything, but you can always have these accessible features to make it easier and functional for folks who struggle to access that sort of online content.
Sure. So having that ability, it sounds like, to really customize and adjust things, whether it's through the app or making sure that the app or the website works with your own individual tools that you already have dialed in,
Exactly.
is what's really important to you, that sort of robustness. Yeah.
Yes,
Awesome.
definitely.
So, I know we're having a great time chatting here, and I'm going to just move us up a little bit in our conversation. And I'm curious if you've ever encountered a website or an application that's maybe kind of marketed itself as being accessible, but then when you kind of dig in and really work with it, you're finding that the user experience is still kind of on the poor side. So like we might have ticked all the boxes in terms of WCAG or whatnot,
Mhm.
but the user experience still isn't great. Can you think of any times when that's happened, or and sort of how how you've dealt with that?
Honestly, I'm not I can't think of any examples off the top of my head
Mhm. Yeah, that's fair.
as to, a website that markets or a website or an app that markets itself as accessible, but in the end isn't exactly what it needs to be. But I will say that something I have run across is, of course, a lot of websites, online shopping, etc., use AI bots and like chat features quite
Mhm.
often instead of encouraging customers to call customer service or go through whatever process. These AI bots and chat systems and whatnot pop up all the time. And honestly, for accessibility, they really are not super helpful. Oftentimes, I've never needed to do this specifically, but I'm not sure that an AI bot or an AI chat system would really grasp accessibility needs. And I've always, whenever I've interacted with these chats and stuff like this, it's always like, well, you're not quite grasping what I need you to grasp.
Mhm. Yes, you're bringing up an excellent point. And, in general, we know that at this point in time, at least where things are, AI can tend to be biased against people with disabilities and not understanding those types of requests. And that's like a whole other webinar on its own. But we know that that's an issue. The American Foundation for the Blind just released a new research paper on exactly this topic. And I think it's really interesting that you bring that up. I personally have had some experiences that will validate what you're saying, is that they do not in fact grasp what you're asking for, and
Yeah.
it can result in a significant amount of frustration and probably moving on, quite honestly, to another website. But you just kind of rolled into our next to the last question with that, and that is to say, have you ever had to reach out for customer service or customer support and in like a digital environment? So whether it was a website or an app or something that you were using or some other tool, and like, how did that go for you? Like, assuming you were able to, I mean, were you able to get to a human? And if so, like, what was that experience like?
Yeah, and are you asking in the context of like struggling with accessibility issues or just in general?
Well, accessibility in particular, or a general question that you might have had about, I don't know, maybe you bought a new microwave and you had a question, and was there an accessible means of getting in touch with
Yeah.
that business in particular? So either one, either or, whatever you've got.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Honestly, it's pretty rare for me to contact customer service. That might come from being a millennial and not always loving to physically talk to a human being.
100%.
Um, but there was one time years ago where I had ordered a smartwatch and it wasn't working the greatest, and I had to call customer service and get their assistance, and I eventually needed to send the smartwatch back to them to be repaired or replaced. And from what I remember, it was a pretty smooth process, maybe frustrating in the sense of it took a little while to get to an actual human being.
Sure.
Um, and I do think that sometimes these processes are intentionally confusing, and intentionally convoluted. But in terms of
Doing a
my,
lot of head nodding along with you.
yeah,
Yeah,
um, but
awesome.
I I'm really struggling to think of like another example of when I've needed to call customer service. I always generally view myself as pretty tech savvy and able to
Sure.
find answers and whatnot, but it's
Well, and
definitely a problem.
that's a good point too, and that is to just remind folks that there are those of us who, maybe are a little more tech savvy, more on sort of like the power user side of things with our assistive technology, but one should not have to function at that level
Absolutely.
to be able to access and understand digital content and how
Yeah.
things work. So,
Yeah.
um,
And when there's definitely I struggle with online content frequently, and I'll say that I also, I live with my partner and he's someone who has full sight.
mhm,
And, when I'm struggling with certain things, he's right there and I always ask him for assistance. And he was one of those very, very lovely people who, just does his absolute best to help me navigate the world. And
mm,
like an example that I always think about is when we are at a restaurant and there's, a menu that I'm struggling to read. Oftentimes, before I even ask or prompt, he'll just take a quick picture of the menu, text it to me, and that's just the easiest way for me to read menus. So of course, I don't have my partner with me all the time. We both have separate jobs. But that is really nice to have a support person
of course.
who is super, both tech savvy and has full vision to help me navigate certain
Right.
situations and whatnot.
So the moral of the story is we're using all the tools in the toolbox, right?
Absolutely.
High
Every
tech,
tool
low
I have
tech,
accessible.
human, AI, we're using them all. Hey, I'm going to wrap us up here with one last quick question. And that is to say, Julia, if you had a chance to sit with someone, a designer, developer who was maybe going to launch a new product, and they were being really intentional about wanting their product to be accessible and work for as many people as possible and for folks to have a good user experience. Is there any piece of advice that you would give them? What would you like them to know?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I would say is collaborate and consult with a company like Accessible Web. That this is their purpose, is to help companies and organizations come up with good, solid, accessible online content. And if that's not, accessible for a company or whatnot, talk to those of us who do have disabilities. And of course, there's not only visual disabilities
Of
out there,
course.
but there's all kinds of disabilities that may really that folks may really struggle with. So I think my biggest piece of advice is talk to us.
Yes.
Get us at the table, get us to test your website or your online content in whatever way that looks like. We are the experts in our own, accessibility needs, and we have a lot to say, and we love to help folks make our world more accessible for everyone.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Julia.
Of
That's,
course.
yeah, thanks for the AWeb shout out. And we didn't pay you or prime you to say that. So
Exactly.
yay for you, yay for us.
Awesome.
Awesome. So I know we've been going for a while now. I'm going to hand it back over to Gianna for a minute to just kind of talk with us a little bit more about AWeb and our products and services. And then I do want to get to at least a couple of questions from the audience.
Yeah, so I think I'll keep it brief today. I'll say if you want help creating accessible experiences for your users, or connecting with users for user testing, please reach out to us and we are happy to have a much more in-depth conversation. I want to leave enough time for today's questions because we do have
Yeah.
some in chat here. So I'm going to jump right into them. And the first one is an interesting one, that kind of ties into the accessible web question that I'd love to get you guys' perspective on. So this question is for accessible web. Based on this conversation, it seems like some of the features of overlays, such as magnifiers, may be helpful for low vision users. How do we add these features to our sites without disrupting user experience? So I want you guys to kind of jump in and give your perspective on this or clarify, if that's not kind of what you want people to take away. Yeah.
Sure, sure. So I can start, and Julia, I'd be interested, obviously, to hear what you have to say. And I guess the first thing I would say is do accessibility right, bake it into your content, make sure that at the baseline, everybody can use it, regardless of whatever type of tech they're using or not using to show up to your site or your app. If you would like to offer some enhancements that some people do find helpful, I think that that is okay to do, but it is not okay to rely on that explicitly and just say, oh, well, we added these buttons where you can click to make my website accessible, because that, in fact, for a lot of users, does make things less usable. So I guess that's what I would say. But Julia, I'd be interested to hear if you have other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I would say that compatibility is key, especially if you're developing a mobile app. I think this applies to both mobile apps and websites, but just make sure it's compatible with different types of screen readers, screen magnifiers, high contrast, third party um, apps or services, whatnot. I think it's just so important to make sure that your product is compatible with all sorts of different types of accessible tech.
That's right. And so that you basically just encapsulated the R, or the robust component of the core principles of web accessibility: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, right? And so if you are doing the accessibility work right, you're doing that manual auditing, you're following WCAG, the latest content accessibility guidelines. So you're doing all those things. And then if you want to offer these additional features, I think it's fine. The last thing I'll say about that is if you are going to offer or layer on any additional features like that, do not, please, I beg of you, have them like grab focus from the user the minute you land on the site, because that can be very distracting and disorienting. So yeah, that's a great question. And it's nuanced, right?
Yes, awesome. Okay.
Do you have
So
anything else, Fiona or Jewett, that you'd like to add to that?
I don't necessarily think so. I think the
Okay.
key is to understand that a lot of users are going to be coming with their own technologies already. So if you
Mhm.
want it to be accessible from the ground up so it works with whatever other users bring. And I think offering those additional features could be sometimes a bonus for some users, but for many, they've got their own already set up. And your website's not the only website they're visiting. So they want a seamless experience across all. And then what features of a short video on a website make a good experience for you?
Okay,
Question
so they're
here.
here.
Yeah.
I'll take that one first. So for me, not being able to see anything meaningful on a screen, an audio description would be awesome. Assuming that it's not just straight up narrated type content. If there's any music playing in the background while things are happening, that sort of thing, making sure that you're in WCAG compliance with audio descriptions certainly would help me. And again, that's my personal use case. There are, as we've pointed out, a variety of users. Some folks will benefit from having a transcript. Some folks will benefit from having captions. Julia, I don't know if there's anything else for you related to like being able to find controls or anything that would also make better experience for you.
I don't think so. I think you covered pretty much all of it, Heather, with just, having all those different types of options available. So whether that's, oh, I'd also say, I guess, playback speed. Playback speed could be a big one of, if someone needs to slow it down because maybe they have a processing disorder, or maybe there's someone who is really used to audio talking really, 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 really fast, because there's a lot of folks within the visually impaired and blind community that has, screen readers at like 200%, and they're just like constantly going and going and going. So maybe playback speed could also be another good option. But I think other than that, Heather, you got them all.
So I think the theme here that we're keep coming back to is the robust nature of just making sure that your content is working for as many humans as possible, regardless of how they're getting there and how they're accessing it. And the best way to do that is to do accessibility, right? Do your manual auditing, continually check with automated scanning, and engage with your users with disabilities periodically, not a one and done, right? Because this is all very dynamic content. These things change and improve and evolve over time. So just implementing that is part of your daily workflow and how you manage your digital assets, I think will serve you the very best.
Perfect. And then we got another question here. Do the fonts in websites or apps have an effect on readability or accessibility for you? If so, what should designers keep in mind when choosing fonts?
So this probably has a few parts to it.
Yes.
Julie and I can speak to the user side of things. I'm not sure if we have anybody on here who'd like to speak to the technical side of things. And I'll let you take it, Julia, since I don't look at font.
Sure. Yeah, so the biggest advice I would have for font style specifically is really, really try to stay away from like cursive looking fonts. Those can be very, very challenging to read. So try to stick with, a kind of a blocky type font style like Arial, Times New Roman, Georgia, stuff like that. Those are going to be your best bets for pretty much across the board. I would say in terms of size, for me personally, that doesn't necessarily matter because again, I use my built-in um, Zoom magnifications and stuff like that. I always say rule of thumb, 16, maybe even 14 for font size. But again, I think that's not necessarily as important as the style itself.
I think there are some WCAG criteria related to
Yes.
this. I just don't know them off the top of
I
my
can
head.
jump in. So Ben had added to in a text response to this question that there are a few WCAG success criteria related to fonts, and he gave an example of 1.1.12 text spacing. So, and if you want to dive more into this, we have a whole knowledge base on our website that I totally recommend checking out. There's a lot of content about font sizes, color contrast. So dive into there, and there's a lot of linked resources that can help answer this question and take you a little further on the topic as well.
Yeah, as well as our Manual Audit Mondays webinar
Yes.
series, where we're taking a step-by-step look at each of the WCAG success criteria. I believe it's 2 criteria at a time each week, and showing you how to manually audit and remediate for those issues.
Awesome. All right, this one kind of comes back to Julia here. So so Jessica says, thanks for sharing, Julia. Magic the Gathering is pretty big. Wondering if you've reached out to them, and wondering if you'd reach out to them, what their response was for accessibility. Were they open to it? Not that this should be your responsibility anyway, but
I love that point. Thank you for
yes.
bringing that up, because honestly, I have not thought about contacting them, which is like, now it's like, oh wait, why didn't I think about, sending them a message or something? So I love that thought. I love that idea of just, kind of sending them a message and being like, hey, here's my experience of your app. That is something that I will kind of add to my list of things to think about.
Yeah, obviously this is a good example of people don't always have time to be giving as much feedback as they can. So this is one of the great reasons that it's valuable for companies to hire and pay UX testers in the instances to get firsthand experience and to compensate people submitting their experience to you and providing that feedback. But if you do end up reaching out to them, Julia, let us know how it goes. I think we'd all be interested.
I certainly will. I will report back.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
And then we have another question on font size, spacing, and contrast, and how that affects your ability to read. I would say that we kind of answered this in the last question there. It does, and it varies per user and their ability to, their sightedness, or how they're accessing the technology, if they're using a magnifier. So you want to kind of conform to the WCAG success criteria so you're offering as robust an experience for all users as possible. And there are a lot of resources in our knowledge base, and in some of our past content that you can dive into deeper to get into the specifics of that.
One of the things that jumped out from Julia is she clearly has Julia, you've got like a Swiss Army knife of all these different tools you're using, right? And this is a great example of where, yes, an overlay can be helpful in some circumstances, but really you want to make your website work and be robust for a variety of these different technologies. If you're just relying on a single overlay that's embedded, there may be issues that are unforeseen, and it may be just how your website is coded, nothing you did intentionally, but just oversight. And so I think that these questions about font size, spacing, contrast, there's a whole variety of different combinations of abilities, disabilities, and folks are using various Swiss Army knives, various toolkits of assistive technology for situations that they encounter, and they're comfortable with the tools that they're using. So wherever possible, you really want to just make sure you're doing your best to do this right. And there is really no perfect answer, but try to follow the applicable WCAG success criteria, listen to your customers if they do reach out to you, and just be aware that there's a lot of different tools, a lot of different use cases and user situations, and there is no perfect answer for this.
Yep. On to the next question here. Do you often need to adjust browser or device settings in addition to using ZoomText?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yes, I'm going to say yes, because so for Apple products, for instance, iPhones, iPads, there's a general like display setting, which if you make it, I think it's normal versus large or something along those lines. If you switch into the large display, it makes your apps a little bit bigger. It makes your notifications bigger. There's less space in between certain things. So I will often, when I switch to a new phone, I will make sure that my display is in, that large mode. And honestly, same thing for computers and laptops. So I would say yes.
Awesome.
And that's just another example, I think, of what Peter was talking about. Whereas when, people have their settings like pretty well dialed in, like they know what works for them.
Yeah. And you can imagine that's a much better experience for users who are using all kinds of websites and apps and different online content than having to adjust those settings per each website, which is the case with an overlay or when you go to build those tools into the website. So if you're going to focus your money and your resources in one direction, it would be definitely making sure that your website is accessible, your website or app are accessible from the ground up and conform with WCAG success criteria as closely as possible. So you can offer that user experience for the most users as possible. Okay, and then let's see, this is a question about user testing. So is NVDA good to use for testing content, reading order, etc., if we do not have access to JAWS or a blind student or employee to do kind of firsthand UX testing? Let's see. So this is NVDA a good screen reader to use if you're just doing some basic passovers to kind of see if it's operable with the screen reader?
So I will say, it's Heather here, I will say yes, with the caveat that that's not the only usability testing or user testing you should be doing. If you're a developer, designer, or a content creator and you just want to get like a quick idea, NVDA is absolutely robust and functional in a way that will help give you some meaningful results. And I will also give the caveat that the sighted user, like just tabbing around with NVDA or JAWS or VoiceOver or any other screen reader of choice, is never going to be an equivalent experience to a native user, because we just navigate differently in order to be efficient, and things like focus order and that sort of thing really come into play. So if you just want to get an overview quickly and see like, oh, I made this change behind the scenes, how did that pan out? Yes, you should absolutely not rely on that, any screen reader, NVDA or otherwise, to be making determinations about how accessible your website or your content or your app is, because there's so very much more to it. And we talk a lot about screen readers, and they are only a fraction of the assistive technologies that are out there. So we certainly don't want to silo any kind of testing into just using screen readers, regardless of which one you use.
Yes, this is why, doing the full manual audit, understanding really from the ground up where you stand in terms of WCAG conformance is super important before you even get into all of that, because it's designed for the widest applicability and to offer the best user experiences for the most number of users and assistive technologies. All right. And then we have two more questions here that I don't know if you guys will, what feedback you'll have on these, and if you can't answer them, it is fine. We can follow up after the fact. The first question here is text alignment affecting people while reading text? Is it better to left align or justify text? And then the follow-up question is does soft hyphens on paragraphs make it harder to read the text for people with visual impairments?
Yeah, so it's Heather here. I can't comment on that.
Figured.
I don't know. I don't know if you have a thought or an opinion, Julia.
I'm not.
If not, that's
honestly,
fine too.
I'm not even sure exactly what that means. So I think I would
sure that's fair.
That is fine. And we can follow up with this question after the fact too.
Absolutely.
We'll check with the rest of our accessibility specialist team and see if they have any thoughts on these questions. And we can follow up with you after. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your experience today, Julia. And Heather, this was fantastic. I think we really got a lot out of this, and we've gotten a lot of thank yous in the comments and chat here. So that is all the questions we have open right now. Again, if anybody has any follow-up questions or wants to chat with us about how we can help you either get a better understanding of where you currently stand in terms of accessibility or design and develop stuff in a more accessible manner, please reach out, and we're happy to have those personal conversations off Zoom here.
Thank you so much, Gianna. And Julia, thank you. I really appreciate how candid and honest you were in sharing your lived experience. And I think a lot of times that putting a name and a face with the user experience, sometimes that can be a little bit of a missing link for folks in the accessibility world. So thank you so much for being willing to chat with me today. And thank you
Absolutely.
everyone for joining us. I hope you learned something, and feel free to reach out if you have any other questions that we didn't answer today.
And thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We'll catch you all next week.
Yeah.
Later all.